Whatever there's fallen or wounded humans, the demon's going to hover there looking for the opportunity.
Despite women having more power, wealth, and freedom than ever, they are the most unhappiest they've ever been. Do you think that that's a natural, a man-made progression, or do you think there's a spiritual aspect to that?
Lady Gaga, you can look it up. I mean, this is public knowledge. She made a pact. She sold her soul.
And I don't know if you're allowed to talk about this, but are you allowed to say some of the craziest experience you've seen whilst being an exorcist?
Have 8 men holding down a 15-year-old girl, and she would throw us throughout the room. It was incredible.
You hear Baal, you hear Moloch. Do you ever encounter one of these high-level demons, I guess?
He asked, "How many are you?" And he said, the demon answered, "If you could see our number, we would darken the sun."
All eyes are on Israel. So, what do you think's going on over there?
This is carrying into the modern age. I mean, this is what Rogan and Tucker Carlson and these others are starting to see. Something bizarre is happening.
Something that's always blown my mind was this. Currently, 95% of people aren't subscribed. Realistically, we're still starting our journey. But if you like what we're doing and you want to see more, the easiest way for you guys to support us would be to subscribe to the channel down below. Our promise to you is to keep upping our content with bigger guests and better talks. Anyways, hope you enjoy the show. Okay, so I don't normally do this, but I feel you're a very unique guy, and all of your qualifications, I feel that we can really go into this stuff in depth. So with that, Dr. Dan Schneider, you're adjunct professor of theology at Franciscan University, master's in theology at Franciscan University as well, PhD in biblical studies from the Maryvale Institute in Birmingham, England, author of Liber Christio Method, and a former U.S. Army helicopter pilot.
Yeah.
That's quite the list.
Yeah. So I've had a broad range of experiences over my life, and my wife tells me I've lived multiple lives. So, but God uses all things to, so it was interesting how my past life as a cavalry officer and just kind of resurfaced. I came back from Desert Storm and literally put all that into a box or boxes in my garage, and it wasn't until much later, after raising a family, getting into a business career and all these other things, that I revisit that box, and it seems that our Lord has repurposed those old cavalry memories and put them into good use for a greater good, I think.
Yeah, wow. I should say too, I didn't think exorcists actually exist. It was only really quite recently I spoke to another guy doing a similar thing. But, my honest take when it came to like demons and spiritual warfare, I always thought that it was a bit like a placebo. Like when someone says they're depressed, and there's a difference between someone who like casually says it and then someone who actually believes it. And I kind of thought like it's the same with demons. Like if you truly believe you're getting plagued by demons, suddenly that becomes true, And it's like people shape their own reality to a point. But like, how would you describe spiritual warfare, and like how real is this?
Yeah, what I find interesting is that in many ways in the church, and church is defined broadly, I'll give you an example from the Catholic Church. Father Ripperger tells the story of a bishop that he met. And Father Ripperger is one of the world's most renowned exorcists that I work with. And the bishop said, "I believe the devil exists. I just don't think he's in my diocese." So you have this in some Christian circles, you have this idea that just what you say, the devil is something that it's not really a person. It's just this embodiment of the evil that lays in man's heart. And if we can put aside these things, we can create a just society and these other things. But that just goes against at least Catholic Church teaching that the devil is real. It's a real person. And the other extreme is, people that are looking for the devil all the time. They become obsessed with the devil. I say in the book that, hey, the devil is tertiary in spiritual combat, that our primary focus needs to be and is and always should be on Jesus Christ. The secondary focus is what are the obstacles that keep us from being united with him? And finally, okay, what is the demon doing? But the old adage, if you go looking for the devil, he will find you. There's a certain amount of truth to that. You have to be careful of being curious. So a lot of people are very curious about what's going on. And so they'll just do a lot of, we're in a time, at least in the United States, we're in this, getting ready for us, for Catholics, All Hallows Eve, which is and All Saints Day and All Souls Day, which has been usurped by Halloween. And so it's just a time of macabre curiosity to evil, and people put all sorts of crazy symbols of death in their lawns and decorate their houses, and it's just become absurd over here. But at the same time, while the world is kind of sleeping, or at least looking at these two extremes, the secular world is waking up. Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Sean Ryan, you others that are working in really secular media are starting to recognize there's something going on here that's unexplainable, that evil has reared its ugly head. It's no longer hiding. And there's something that's cannot be explained between Democrat, Republican, Whit and Tory or whatever. The real battle people are starting to see is not Democrat and Republican, it's good versus evil. And there's something really dark and evil behind the scenes taking place. And that's what I think is being unearthed through social media and platforms such as yours as well.
No, it's true. It's true. It's kind of, you can't really avoid it nowadays. And I feel this for me. You know, I wouldn't even consider myself the most spiritual guy, but it's just everywhere you look, you know? And, you know, I guess with like modern life, people try and explain the unexplainable. So what I always kind of found confusing was when it came to people with like mental illnesses, are they real, or is this maybe like demon possession, or is it maybe a bit of both? Or
yeah, that's the real trick. That needs to be it needs to be navigated and determine causality. For the first half of what you said, we're seeing playing out in real time. The devil militates to absurdity, and what we see in individual cases, because I've worked for many years now, individual cases of possession and other levels of affliction. The devil works to absurdity, and that actually works in our favor. Somebody that militates to absurdity. So an individual gets to a point where they say, I'll do this, but I won't do that. This has to stop. Whether it's someone that is going through gender dysphoria, and you know, starting to try to change their gender identity, at some point they wake up and go, wow, this is, I can't believe what have I done to get to this point? This has become absurd. But what we see in those individual cases, we're also seeing culturally and societally. We're starting to see that society is seeing the absurdity taking place, and that the demons militating into absurd extremes. And the secular world is waking up saying, whoa, we need to really check this and find out what's happening. And so there is a discernment factor. You have to factor in psychological. You can't just assume if somebody has autolocutions, hallucinations that are of a religious context. That doesn't mean that it's actually diabolic or religious. It could just be some people just have psychological underpinnings, woundedness. So you have to exhaust all psychological remedies first. So in our system, we have a really strict protocol to determine causality, because if you have somebody, and I've seen it many, many times in my travels, people that say, well, you know, I just met a woman last weekend at a conference that she came in from Canada to the Midwest United States to try to talk to me, because she thinks she's possessed. And so we don't know. You just can't determine it. So even if she is possessed, praying over her before she's ready to be prayed over could cause more damage. And so you pray over her. They think exorcism is a one and done thing. I can just have one exorcism prayed over me, and then I'll be free. It doesn't work that way. We're seeing an average of at least 2 years for cases of possession to find liberation. And that's week in, week out grinding prayer. So it's not going to happen overnight. Or when you have a case where somebody is just largely psychologically afflicted, the demon is always going to be there. Whatever there's fallen or wounded humans, the demon's going to hover there looking for the opportunity to take advantage of that. And so if you pray over somebody too quickly and they're not ready, their will isn't strong enough, you could find it actually makes things worse for them. They say, well, because the demon is standing right over their shoulder saying, see, even Jesus can't help you. So you have to get to the point where they're ready for liberation. And at some level, even when it comes to cases of the most severe possession, all liberation is in a sense self-liberation, that most people can liberate on their own without sometimes with the assistance of the church and an exorcist, but they can liberate by themselves just by reordering their lives, getting rid of all the garbage, the spiritual and psychological and deficiencies in their virtue, getting their marriages, regularizing the church, stop looking at porn, just living a moral life and living a life of virtue and prayer. Most people can liberate just through the discipline. So our first phase is a I can give it to you. I can post it in the show notes. The first phase is a prayer regimen, not unlike what in Catholic circles we have Exodus 90, which is a prayer discipline that guys do together. Prayer and fasting and these other things. It's just ours is a short little 30-day burst of prayer and strict set times of prayer. And what we find is that the demon responds to that imposition of order as much as to the prayers themselves. So exorcism isn't a magic pill. It isn't a trick play. It's a grind, but the prep work needs to be done by the individual so they're ready to receive the graces that is offered to them in and through the church and the exorcist.
Yeah. I think, you said something that was really good, because I hear some people describe this and they say they put down all of the bad things down to demons. And I find that's too broad, because then you kind of take away people's individual accountability. You can just blame it all on a demon. I've done nothing wrong. It's not me. Free will doesn't exist almost to a point when you kind of have that mindset, I think.
And there's even that mindset in the exorcist community, and there's different models and nuanced models of liberation. You'll hear some say that, we have to free up their will. So we have to go do exorcism so their will is free. But that will is sovereign. So that person has to get to that point where they say, I want to be done with this. I want to be liberated. I want to be free. Over here we have this show called Cops. They go into the urban cities, urban environments.
I know the one. Yeah.
It's a great show. I mean, it's a lot of these cities don't want them in there anymore. The mayors are not letting them in. But the stereotypical episode is a woman is getting beaten by her boyfriend. She goes in. The cops show up. They go into the house. By the time they get there, the fight is over. He's got a scratch on his face. She's got a black eye. Her shirt is all torn. The place is a wreck. The dog's locked into the closet barking. And the cops go to take the guy away. And inevitably what happens, the woman says, "Don't take him away. It's my fault. I love him. He's my baby's daddy. And I don't, it's my fault." So what's going on there? There is a psychological compatibility with the evil that is taking place in this home. Something is driving him to abuse her, and something is driving her to allow this situation and not walking away to get free. And so what we're seeing physically in the psychological realm, that somebody could do a master's a doctoral thesis on to understand this relationship, is happening also cosmically. You have this psychological and symbiotic relationship that the demon is using to fuel the behavior, to habituate the behavior, to keep these individuals in the enslavement. And so if you can understand the psychology of this domestic violence situation, you can understand the diabolic psychology as well that's taking place cosmically that we don't see. And so until she gets ready to say, "Get him out of here," and she says, "I don't want him out," and she gets the restraining order and she breaks free of him, he's going to continue to come back. He's going to continue to come back. And just like we see, it's popular now. I don't know if it's a modern phenomenon or we're just recognizing it for what it is, but narcissistic behavioral disorder. If you understand that, and if you have people that that are in relationships with someone who has narcissistic behavior disorder, you see the same thing. They have abuse, physical or psychological, emotional, and then once they push you so far, they love bomb you. "Oh, I'm so sorry." And they tweak that soft spot and they wiggle their way back in. So what happens in that domestic violence call? The guy gets released from jail after 48 hours. He posts bail. He comes back. He doesn't come back and love bomb her. He comes back and beats her and says, "What are you doing calling the cops? What are you doing?" Right? And so it just makes things worse. And so that same thing happens when someone comes to the church and they say, "I want to be liberated because I'm afflicted." If you just come and do the exorcism, which is calling the cops and getting him out of the house, he just comes back with a sevenfold vengeance. And so until the person is ready to change the locks, to move to a different house and totally break and change their lifestyle, including getting rid of this bum, that the bum is going to keep coming back and he's going to use whatever tactics he has to keep his foot in that door.
So you are right when you say that there's kind of a big awareness to it, but this word specifically, the whole narcissist and all that, I do think it's kind of overused. Suddenly we're in a situation.
But in our call narcissist, we used to just say he's a jerk, right?
Right.
Or he's self-centered, or he's an egotistical maniac, or But yeah, I think it's overused. But I think if you understand the patterns of that psychological disorder, you can understand the diabolic pattern, the way they go to work on us. And they're going to work on us according to our own bents. They're going to dial in a temptation that is perfect for you, because your temptation is going to be different than my temptation. St. Augustine in late 300s wrote about how the demon tempts us with the goal of habituating us. And it's St. Augustine that gives us our understanding of signs and symbols and signification, where we would later develop what we would call semiotics, how signs and symbols point to greater reality. So St. Augustine talks about this in the 300s, but he also talks in light of how the demon tempts us. And so he says that the demon's going to tempt a Greek and a Roman in a different way. And he gives the example of the word beta. To the Greek, beta is the second letter of the alphabet. It means second in order. Beta testing, a beta male,
Classic, yeah.
The classic beta male, which is derogatory. But anyway, you understand what I mean. It's second in order.
Yes.
Yeah. It's second in order. It's just an example of beta. But to the Roman, to the Latin, a beta it's a purple vegetable. It's a beet. And so he's not going to use the word beta. He'll use that word differently for each individual. And that's one example that he gives. And so the demon has access psychologically to the memory, the imagination of each one of us. He was present to those moments in our past, or certain ones were, that and was driving certain behaviors, was present at these activities, these experiences. So our memories and our imaginations, all these things is the data set that he has access to. He doesn't have access to the higher faculty of the intellect and the will, but through the passions and then through the memories, he can start to project, and that's how he communicates. This is by his angelic nature. He communicates through projection, and we catch this sometimes. You'll catch these crazy thoughts like, where'd that crazy thought come from? It's a diabolic projection. And so you got part of working with cases of liberation is that the filter that shuts off and can enable to say, no, I'm not going down that rabbit hole of thinking. I'm not going to take that thought, take the bait, is training, teaching these people that are afflicted to discern the clean from the unclean. Clean from unclean thoughts, clean from unclean sex, clean from unclean behaviors, clean from unclean speech. So, and it begins with the thoughts and having custody of that imagination, because the demon will manipulate all those memories. If you were molested as a child by a guy that was wearing a white T-shirt, had really nice hair and a tight beard, right? And your facial features, right? If you always got to do is, and he was wearing a blue baseball hat and drove a green pickup truck, always got to do, and he was wearing Christian Dior or whatever cologne, all he's got to do, because he works through the senses, is piece together one or two sensory items, whether it's visual, whether it's tactile, or whether it's olfactory, the smell, and he can trigger that memory. And if you don't have custody of the imagination, he triggers the memory, you get drawn into this painful traumatic experience. And once you're in that painful traumatic experience, he pulls you out of the higher faculty of the intellect, which is sovereign, and he pulls you down into the emotions, and you begin to make decisions out of the emotions. And now your will is somewhat compromised, or at least it's compromised to the extent that it's disordered, that the will is driving it. And so he can project these things, and in so doing, habituate our behavior. I was watching, I was a boxer, and I love watching boxing, and I was watching, I love Tyson Fury. I don't know if you're a boxing fan, but Tyson Fury is a classic. He moves like a middleweight, and he's a huge guy, and he's a character, he's a real character. He's a fun fighter to watch and listen to. But I forget the guy he was fighting. This was about 2 years ago. He was fighting a guy, and then Tyson he would fake a jab, and every time he would fake it, the guy would cover. Now, when you're covering an uppercut, you have to, when I train fighters, you have to take both hands and cover them this way, because if you do it like this, they'll split your hands. It's 2 against 1, 2 hands versus 1 hand. And that's the only way you're going to stop an uppercut. So Tyson was starting to feign this uppercut. And as he did, this guy was just blocking it. He would just instinctively go here. And I was like, that's dangerous. And then the announcer said, he better watch it. because Tyson's setting him up. And sure enough, in the 5th round, Tyson fakes. He leads with the uppercut. The guy does a half stop instead of covering both, and he catches him with the uppercut, knocks him out cold. And the announcers call it, the uppercut heard around the world. If we know this, and if in martial arts and combat sports, we know how to set up our opponent to knock them out or tap them out in jiu-jitsu and judo. If we know how to set up a sequence, we start with this, but in the back of our mind, we're looking at a chain down the road. If he does this, I do that. If he does this, I do that. If we know how to do that just to win a human prize, a medal, or to win a fight, how much the demon knows? But spiritually,
right.
The spiritual life, it's combat sports, and it's recognizing when he does this, he knows. We know what he's going for. I've been working out for the last year, learning judo and jujitsu, and so when I have a couple of training partners, they know what my principal judo throws are going for. So when I make a move with my foot this way, they counter it the other way. So I have to work on sequences to try to catch these guys off guard because they know my moves. Now I might be able to catch somebody that doesn't know my moves. That limited ones that I have. I'm not a black belt or anything by any stretch of the imagination, but the point is that the enemy's watching us. He's watching us and he's tracking our movements. And to know that it's okay. It doesn't make us obsessed with what the devil is doing. It doesn't make us constantly looking at, rather than watching shows about exorcism and talks about exorcism, you're better off learning about the spiritual life and getting mentally and physically healthy. That's some of the natural ways of spiritual combat. There's natural means, getting a good night's sleep. This is the Jordan Peterson, which triggers some liberals. Get up in the morning at the same time, make your bed. Part of that discipline, remember, the demon responds to the imposition of order as much as to the prayers themselves. So part of on the human level is doing battle in the spiritual life is just being as much living a natural human life with discipline and virtue the best we can. These are some of the natural ways of combat: eating healthy food, getting sleep, exercising, staying physically fit. Grace builds on nature. And so sometimes, when I deal with afflicted people, the demon's keeping them up all night, or every night at 3:00 in the morning, they're getting awakened. There's all sorts of symbolism in that 3:00 hour. So they're tormenting them by not getting them rest, because the demon doesn't have to sleep. He's disembodied. We need sleep. It's part of our brain. Our brain, we need it for refreshing our bodies and our interior self. So all that is geared together, but the demon knows this, and he knows human nature, and what he tries to do is habituate us. And so what he'll do too is, I don't know if did you have an older brother?
No, I have an older sister.
All right. So I know you've done this to your sister. You held her down and then you would grab her arm and you would punch her and say, why are you hitting yourself? Because every older brother, every older brother would pick on his little sister or little brother, and he would make them punch themselves. And that's what the demon does. He doesn't care if you hit yourself with alcohol abuse, drug abuse, pornography, sex abuse. He doesn't care what you choose to beat yourself with. He just wants to habituate you, to drive you to make decisions out of the emotions, driving the emotional inconstancy. So it's up and down, up and down. In that up and down, he finds vulnerabilities. He grabs your arm. He beats you with whatever you choose to self-abuse with. And that's the most common pattern that we see.
Yeah, well, I mean, you said like a few on your list there on, just being healthy, looking after yourself, looking after your body. But from a Christian perspective, what are some of the things that we should probably be doing more in like modern society that we don't do now?
Yeah, I think before we look at changing the society, I think of G.K. Chesterton, who is a famous essay contest that he applied. It was an essay contest in a local newspaper, and the essay question was, "What's wrong with the world?" And he answered, his essay was, "What's wrong with the world? I am." And I think we have to recognize that the real battle is taking place interiorly. Before we go to change the world, we have to start working on our own interior life, start working on our own selves to become better Christians. Because, going back to the 2nd century, Hippolytus of Rome likens the Christian to leaven in the world, picking up from the words of Christ, and that the Christian is a society. This has been developed from the words of Jesus himself, that we must be leaven, we must be light. But we can't be good leaven unless we have worked through and started growing in virtue. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to wait until you're Mother Teresa before you do anything. but until you're perfect. No, we are imperfect servants. Someone said, I don't go to church anymore because there's a bunch of hypocrites. And I said, well, if you don't go to church because because it's filled with hypocrites, there's always room for one more, because at the end of the day, we're all hypocrites. None of us really live it. There's a very few truly holy people, but Mother Teresa, who was one holy one that lived in our own lifetime, she was asked, do you want to help the world? Go home and love your family. So it begins at home. It begins in the interior life, becoming holy, growing in holiness and virtue. And then if God calls you to do what you're doing or what I'm doing, fine, so be it. But do it with a heart of service. Do it out of love for Jesus Christ. When you serve these in the least of my brethren, you serve me. And so, but first, working on the interior self.
There's the interior self, but even when I think of like home life for everyone now, because Christianity, there's a hierarchy, right? It goes God, man, wife, children, if I'm not wrong, if I'm not mistaken. And how do you still see that should be the order of the household? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical for spiritual combat, is getting this in order. When I train a fighter, I didn't start with, okay, here's the 1, 2, 3 combination. You start with footwork. You got to get, every fighter knows, you got to get your feet under you. When I started learning judo, I had to learn how to place my feet and how to, you got to get your feet under you first. And so then the other, other moves or tactics and that come after that. So getting your feet, part of having your feet under you is the authority structure. I was doing some work at a parish, teaching at a parish, and a lady came up to me after one of my talks, and she said, I wanted to thank you. I wanted to introduce myself and just personally say thank you. And I said, well, for what? She said, I saw you on a podcast 5 years ago. And at that time, my daughter was 15 and she was going through gender dysphoria and wanted to transition to male. And we saw your podcast, and the podcast with this priest and this other guy, you were talking about the authority structure and the importance of the authority structure. My husband and I just happened to listen to that, and we just started putting that into practice. And it doesn't mean that she discovered her husband is better or holier. It just means this is the way that God has arranged it, that the husband should be the one who leads, who should lead the prayer. He should be the spiritual leader. And the wife should work and not just support of him, but allow him to protect and provide for her. She said, so we started putting this into practice, and I want you to know it saved our marriage. We were in a terrible place, and it brought our daughter back from an abyss. She's on the path to recovery. It's going to be a long process, but she's no longer having these invasive thoughts, and she's coming around. And so just that alone, putting that principle in order was life-changing for them. And so it shows you that the demon's going to respond. He's not going to respond because I have a PhD or I know biblical Greek or whatever. He's going to yield for first and foremost. He's going to yield. First question he's going to ask is, does this person have the requisite authority over the person, the place, or the object? This is critical in spiritual combat that's largely overlooked. So having that authority and understanding the authority structure is very important. So the second is this person virtuous? Is he in a state of grace? If he's not, if he's saying one thing and doing another, he's not going to yield, you'll be retaliated. You could be severely retaliated against. You got to be clean, for spiritual combat. You got to be physically fit, And then finally, the third thing the demons ask us, what is he specifically asking? Being specific in prayer. I can have all the weapons, anti-tank, anti-personnel weapons on my Cobra helicopter, but if I don't hit my target, if I hit him somewhere that he's not vulnerable, when we were in Iraq, we had the first echelon of tanks were T-62s before we get to the Republican Guard that had T-72s, Soviet era tanks. The T-62s, the older tanks, had large external gas fuel cells. So they had this basically 55-gallon drum on the back of their tank. So guess what? Guess what we shot at? You shot at that because you take out the gas, you blow up the tank. So there's specific areas that you would shoot for. We studied our enemy. We knew the vulnerabilities where they were vulnerable in their armor. Even the T-72s had their own vulnerabilities. And so if we know that in physical combat, the demon knows that, and we need to apply that principle in spiritual combat, learning in prayer. But that's the advanced techniques. The first technique is getting yourself spiritually and physically fit for combat, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, just so you know, I agree with this, and I agree with in terms of the family structure. And like, if we were to kind of zoom out and look on a society level, modern life has kind of pushed the idea of equality to this toxic level, whether that's feminism, whether that's getting rid of gender roles, whether that's just getting rid of gender altogether, like you said, with the woke stuff. And, we thought it was a step in the right direction to be as progressive as possible. But now we have all this data that men and women, they're not dating well. We have unprecedented amounts of single mums. We have this growing incel culture with men. On top of that, we have all these studies which show, despite women having more power, wealth, and freedom than ever, they are the most unhappiest they've ever been. Yeah. So do you think that that's kind of a natural, a man-made progression, or do you think there's a spiritual aspect to that?
Well, I think it's both. I think it's a natural. It's a natural progression of things, but I also think that the very construct itself is Luciferian. So we're living. It's a Luciferian construct to say that gender is a social construct. It's a Luciferian assumption. So you have Satanism and Luciferianism. If you think of it, Luciferian is the philosophy. Every priest and pastor that goes through seminary, they have minor and major seminary. Minor seminary is philosophy, major seminary is theology. So you got to have the philosophical foundation before you study philosophy, before you study theology, the study of God, and all that's liturgy, Christology, eschatology, all these other things. So the philosophical underpinning behind all these modern movements, including radical feminism. There's a difference between feminism and womanism, mind you. So radical feminism is in socialism, and a lot of these progressive ideologies is driven by Luciferian constructs, as false secular humanism, that we can attain human perfection apart from God, which is just simply false. So it's driven by secular humanist, atheistic constructs or philosophical foundations. And so when you start with a breakdown, a disconnect between separating man from God and anthropology separate from our understanding of God, then from there you get natural consequences of some of the social ills that you're describing. And it's hard for young men. I know it's very hard for young men to find, and vice versa, for women to find men right now. There's a real difficulty, despite all of the opportunities on the internet. There's all this social interweaving of ways of meeting people, but we're being driven into greater isolation. We've got a generation of young men that are basically living as monks, secular monks, if you will, isolated from one another. And so part of our protocol is shutting down of social media, which is one of the hardest things to do, is to shut down all social media, because we're driven by it. I mean, how often do you catch yourself just flipping through Instagram, like just watching funny videos, But it's the same thing.
And I hate it. Yeah.
And you realize you wake up 15 minutes later, like, what a waste of time. People say, I don't have time to pray. You just spent 15 minutes wasting your time. So my sister sends me, she's a big cat lady. So she sends me cat videos, And so now my Instagram is starting to think that I like cats, because I'll open my sister's videos. And so because this is what it's doing. It's picking up algorithms, and it thinks that I'm a cat lady, and I like kittens. And so it's sending all these cute cat things, cat working at Kentucky Fried Chicken, the cat shooting a machine gun or whatever. And so to counter back, I've been sending her midget wrestling videos. If wrestling is
now
fake,
we're talking.
Now, yeah. So I'm going to mess her algorithms up. So now she's getting all these midget wrestling videos suggested to her. But these algorithms are we see how that works in real time. But if you understand how the demon works to habituate us, this goes back to St. Augustine. The demon is watching the algorithms of what we watch, what we do, what we see. He's seeing the patterns that we set. He's looking at the pattern breaks. So what attracts the demon to us? This is spiritual combat, but he's also checking these algorithms. What he's doing to you and me, he's also doing to society at large. He's first going to try to deceive through Luciferian, disconnected from Christian anthropology, philosophical constructs, and then he's going to come up with the theological, in his case, the satanic. So you have Luciferianism and Satanism. These things are largely at play. We see the act of Satanist, we see the Satanism taking place. We see the Bohemian Grove. We see all these other overt satanic things, and whether it's the P. Diddy or Epstein or Abramovich, and we're like, whoa, what's going on? This is the satanic liturgical ritualistic side, but beneath it, what you're talking about, the social construct, the philosophical secular humanism, it goes back to long before even the time of Christ, but in the modern time, it goes back to some of the principles of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. We're seeing these forces resurfacing in the modern world, philosophical forces.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, you touched on something. This is true for me, right? And I think it's true for a lot of people. That the thing which has really gotten me closer to the church, closer to the idea of this the spiritual awakening, if you like, is first when you acknowledge all the evil, and like I say at the start, we seem to be surrounded by it, and when you acknowledge that there's evil in the world, well, then obviously there has to be the counterbalance. There has to be the good. So that was the kind of the first step for me. And when I truly accepted that, and I think one of the best examples of this is the music industry, like you say. We have, people like Lady Gaga who are literally doing borderline satanic rituals in the music videos. We have like Billie Eilish, and it's not hard to find all this satanic stuff. And then, like you say, with P. Diddy, that element on it too. With all of that, like you always hear of like, whenever people go into fame, you always hear like, oh, they sold their soul or whatever. Is that the case, do you think? Or do you think it's like a form of like demonic possession, which is making them do all these rituals? Or is it just free will? They want to get famous. Like what is it?
Yeah, no, Lady Gaga, you can look it up. I mean, this is public knowledge. She made a pact. She sold her soul. Beyonce will freely admit that she is taken over by another entity during her performances. She becomes something else. So you hear about these actors and actresses doing this and performers. And so, yeah, there's those artists that have said very publicly that they've done this. Lady Gaga actually tried to get out for a while, reached out for help, and others just going into, they use the demon, whether it was one formal act or a series of small acts. They've been in many ways taken over and exchanged the temporal for the eternal for something temporal, fame and fortune, etc. And here's what it sounds like. And Lady Gaga has told this story, and I've heard this from others as well, that the language that the devil uses is, you have what it takes. And so in this case, Lady Gaga performed at some low-level place, and she was feeling frustrated in her career path, etc. She wanted to be famous. And she goes into the parking lot after the show, getting ready to get into her car, and a guy, well-dressed man in a hat and a suit, walks up and says, you have what it takes, right? And what does that mean? You have what it takes to exchange your eternal soul for temporal goods, which I happen to be the prince of this world. I happen to have. When the devil tempted Jesus, it was fame, power, he riches, the world, the flesh, and the devil. These are the common triad of enemies against the human condition. And so you have what it takes to trust me and leap off of this temple wall, if you will. You have what it takes to surrender the most important thing, your eternal soul, in exchange for temporal goods. And so when someone reaches that point of desire, sometimes the enemy moves in and, they do actually make a pact with the devil. It's interactive. And the demon takes it very seriously. And whether it's a formal consecration, and I sell my soul in exchange for these goods, or it's something smaller, once you allow, by smaller, I mean, I wanted to do, I need love. And so I went to, a witch, and she did this potion for me, or I wanted health, or whatever. That exchange that the demon takes very seriously. In the book of Revelation, chapter 12, it says the devil, which word means the divider, the slanderer, the accuser, stands accusing day and night. It's the prosecuting attorney. The demon is a lawyer from hell. And what's he accusing the brethren day and night? He's accusing us of all those things that we gave him permission for. All the pacts that we made, whether it was formally like Beyonce or Gaga, or it was informally. When he gave us a good, he now took some permission. He has no right to the baptized soul. The soul that is baptized belongs by right to Jesus Christ, but we do offer him permissions. And when we want to get out, it's like the street gang thing here, like the Bloods, the Crips, and these others. They have a phrase, blood in, blood out, meaning if you want to join this gang, we're going to jump you in. You're going to shed some blood. You're going to get beat up by all of us. And if you want out of the gang, we're going to jump you out and you're going to bleed. It's going to cost you blood to get in. It's going to cost you blood to get out. And the demon works, and that's just kind of an echo of what's happening cosmically, that when we give these permissions to the demon, It's blood in, blood out. It's not going to be, I changed my mind. I want to be a Christian now. No, you've done all these things. You've lived apart from God. You've rejected God. And especially when you do some witchcraft or really deep, deviant, sinful behavior, sexual sinful behavior, etc. The demon says, I'm sorry, blood in, blood out. And so there's going to be a process of that takes place. And oftentimes in the process of liberation, it's a matter of the person making satisfaction for that past behavior, and getting to the point where they're making satisfaction for those sins and working their way back out with the assistance of the church, but they're working their way, renouncing all of those, reject, renounce, rebuke, all of those decisions that they made. And then freedom, again, liberation isn't just freedom from, so we just get freed from, all this demonic stuff that's happening in our lives. It's always freedom from, but freedom for. And that freedom for is union with Jesus Christ. It's union with God, the Father, through Christ. So when someone like this wants to get out, especially when they made a formal pact, it's very difficult.
Well, this is it. And they say that no one's beyond redemption, but surely if you're at the high levels, it's going to be even harder to get to that point. I don't know. But the interesting thing about it, you're saying the devil, he's the prince of this world. But
Jesus also said, "Have be encouraged. I have overcome this world." When God has assumed he's redeemed, as well. So yeah, he is the prince of this world, but at the same time, it's not like the devil tries to bill this battle as Satan versus Jesus, and that's not the case. Satan is still a creature, a fallen creature, certainly a creature that's far superior to us, but nonetheless, he's not God's equal. He's a fallen angel. So
right.
We can't let him frame the debate as it's like, I'm doing this and Jesus is doing that, and I'm more powerful than
as
Jesus.
As if they're on the same level. Yeah, and
they're not even close. They're not even. There's an infinite difference between the two.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like this whole idea, like, okay, you need to agree to sign your soul away or whatever. It's still the free will. Like, if they had complete control, then surely there would be no need for that. There would be no need for a contract. They've already won. So, and then it kind of leans into that whole idea of karmic retribution. I know this is like what Satanists believe in, and it's almost as if evil is still bounded to these rules and stuff.
Yeah, there are rules, and there are rules of engagement. Each fallen angel is bound by the natural law that they were created under. That drives their behavior, that drives the disorder, that drives what they do, their temptation. And there's certain things that they're bound by. At the beginning, for example, years ago, before we developed this fully developed protocol with Father Ripperger, I was involved with a team. Then we would have 8 men holding down a 15-year-old girl, and she would throw us throughout the room. It was incredible.
She did what, sorry?
She would throw us, I saw a 15-year-old girl that was wearing a Mickey Mouse shirt. She comes bouncing in. Her parents strap her down with tie-down straps onto a table. 8 men hold her down on top of that. She'd throw us off. You couldn't contain, throwing us off like rag dolls. Men. Okay.
Yeah.
Big man, guys a lot bigger than me. And so, but what we've worked, you talk about the free will, our process, you work them through the free will, and we no longer need that. We no longer do that. By the time we don't rush into prayer. We work them through a process. My book is part of that process. And then by the time they get to prayer, they're ready. Their will is strengthened. But what I've seen the first time we had a case that was pre-COVID, and this was a very violent case, and the exorcist says, "Hey, we need to get a bunch of handlers." And I said, "Father, we've worked this case. She's ready. All you need to do is command. The demon must respect your authority." So sure enough, which started, and as soon as the demon manifests, by manifest, it means they take over the bodily senses of the person. The priest just says, I command you to stop and sit here and stop moving her body. Or the demon would throw her to the ground and try to hit her head. I command you to stop trying hitting her head. And you would see that the head would move and stop 1 inch short of hitting the ground. It would just stop. It's like there was this pillow there. The demon was bound because the exorcist, with his authority, commanded that. Wow. And so there's certain rules that they're bound by, and so the authority of the church and the exorcist is one of them. But you're right. And then I've heard there's other things about, these other things that Satan has claimed to be bound to, but there are rules that need to be observed.
Yeah.
And part of those rules too is that you give permissions. You do certain witchcraft. Prayer begets what it signifies. Ask and you shall receive. The diabolic inversion of prayer and blessing is curses. And so there's different layers and types of curses that they do because it's an inversion. The devil can create nothing. Only God can create. God is the creator, the redeemer, the sanctifier. Only God can do these things, but the demon works in a diabolic inversion of the sacred Trinity. So, he can't create, but he can mimic and he can mock and he can mirror in a disordered way our sacramental system of sacraments and blessings. And he does this through curses. In the Old Testament, we see, for example, you have two elements to this, the blessing. You have sacred words and solemn acts and rituals that are imbued with symbolic meaning. And within each of these, in this covenantal construct of solemn sacred words and symbolic gestures and symbols, which is every one of our sacraments. I mean, look at baptism. If you're baptized, you have symbols and words combined together and rituals and gestures. But within that is a malediction, a self-imposed malediction. May this happen to me if I break my vows of this side of this covenant that I made with God. And so that same in an inversion way works when people do curses. Someone says, I did a love potion, even if it's white magic, all magic, whether white or dark magic, has recourses to Satan, tapping into some cosmic power. And what is that? That cosmic power is not of God. It's from the devil. There's no in between. And so there is that same self-malediction when we perform these ritualistic acts, but they work. That's the thing, is people say, oh no, curses only work if you believe in them, right? Just like the devil is only real if you believe in him, curses only work if you believe in him. That's simply not false.
Wow.
They have an efficacy. Now, you cut me off in traffic and I curse you, that's a human curse. There's no efficacy to that. But the ritualistic ones, there's layers and layers of types that go on. They have an efficacy, and our best protection in them is a life of virtue, a life of a state of grace, living a life of holiness and being protected by the church and by Jesus Christ, by our faith, being protected by living in a state of grace. This is what provides the layer of protection for us. And to the extent that we have, what's the demon looking for? Inconsistencies between, any thought, word, and deed that is inconsistent with the indelible mark of baptism. That's what he sees. That's what projects in the cosmos. That's what gives him and projects our vulnerability, and it gives him the space to start working. That's what hits his radar, if you will.
And I don't know if you're allowed to talk about this, but are you allowed to say some of the craziest experience you've seen whilst being an exorcist?
Well, I remember Father Amorth talked about, I did the edits on a book on his official biography a couple of years ago, and his very first case, he had levitation. He saw levitation, never happened again. Oh. But yeah, we've seen, levitation, other manifestations of, body contortions, snake-like, contortions, turning into a spider, crawling, sliding across the room in a chair, that, things that are completely defying gravity, defying human capacity. And that's one of the signs, there's three basic signs in the praenantundra, or the introduction to the rite of exorcism. And one of them is superhuman strength. And part of the superhuman strength is shape-shifting. So body distorting, contorting, face changing. So,
well, like bending in completely unnatural ways.
Bending, snake like the Loch Ness monster working over someone's stomach, and or the throat, you can see it. It's like there's a visible entity beneath it, just scarcely beneath the skin.
Wow.
Things like that are rather common. And it'll make a believer out of you, you know? It'll make a believer out of you when you see it.
Yeah.
You know?
I imagine your faith now is just unwavering.
Yeah. 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 And it's hard because you want to, again, stay focused on Christ, but you realize how real the enemy is. And there was a spiritual writer from I think it's about 100, 150 years ago named De Caussade, a very holy spiritual writer. And one of the things he said was, we would be absolutely obliterated if it weren't for two things: the mercy of God and the infinite merits of Jesus Christ. And so you recognize our total dependence on God. When I'm dealing with cases and I'll working with them and saying, okay, you need to work on these three things. And I find myself echoing inside of me, realizing I have to work on these three things as well. I'm really talking to myself. And so working with cases of diabolic affliction, if you're doing it safely, you're working like we do, we work in the authority structure with the local bishop. When you see the reality of the devil, you have a healthy respect for the enemy. You realize that we're up against, I quoted a famous U.S. Marine, Chesty Puller, in the book. I quote him. He says, "What's our situation?" They asked him, what's your situation? He's in the Korean War. He says, "We're surrounded." That simplifies the problem. It means no matter what direction we shoot, we hit one of them, so
Sure, yeah.
we are surrounded. Father Amorth was in an exorcism. He reports, he asked, "How many are you?" And he said, the demon answered, "If you could see our number, we would darken the sun." So you recognize it. You recognize that we're really outnumbered. But at the same time, we should be of good cheer, of hope that Christ has overcome the world, that we have our hope is in Jesus Christ, in battle for souls, for our own soul and for those that God has entrusted to us, because our victory is ultimately in Jesus Christ. I tell people, I read the Bible every day and I read a little bit of the news every day, so I know what both sides are up to. But I've read the end. I'll give you a spoiler alert. I read to the very end in the book of Revelation, and we win, and so we should have that hope that we're just doing battle. And we've been, I was a paratrooper and as well. And this was like, we're basically airdropped, like paratroopers who dropped in D-Day behind the Germans in the enemy lines, the 82nd Airborne. We've been airdropped behind the enemy and enemy lines, and we have to find our way back. Part of our training we did as pilots was called SEER training: survival, escape, resistance, and evasion, for what happens if you get shot down and behind enemy lines, how to survive, escape, resist, and evade. And the motto of the SEER school is, of SEERs in general, SEER training, is to return with honor. And so returning with honor is the goal. Once you get separated from unit, how do you return with honor? And so I think that applies in the spiritual life. We've been dropped from heaven. God, before we were born, God says, "I knew you. Before you were conceived in your mother's womb, I knew you." So God foreknew us, chose the time and the place to put us in our mother's womb, the exact time, the exact place, the exact family, the exact country, the exact everything. And he airdrops us behind enemy lines, into this dour combat. And he wants us to return to our heavenly home with honor. That's the analogy that I think really applies for us. And so we focus not on what the enemy's doing, but on Christ.
Wow. And then, I've also seen you talk about, they're forced, like these rules again. They're forced to give you certain information. They're forced to give you their name. They're forced to give you end date. Is it?
Right. That's embedded in the rite of exorcism. So the priest demands their name. He demands the date of departure. So there's a handful of things that is demanded, and the demon complies. Now, sometimes he complies and he's mute. Jesus encountered mute spirits. And so not every demon is verbal. Some demons are extremely verbal. Other demons are mute. He'll give you a body gesture. He'll give you a hand symbol, and he gives you his name, or he'll give you a name. If you really want to understand diabolic psychology, watch the movie Nefarious. It's a really good movie, and you understand the way the demon thinks. And the name, he gives the name Nefarious, but he mentions, my name. It's actually a 3,500-year-old extinct Ugaritic name, which means basically nefarious. You can just call me nefarious. Well, they got that by watching hours of Father Ripperger videos. The producers of that movie told me. And so Father Ripperger had a case. I wasn't involved in this particular case, but he had a case where he demanded the name according to the ritual of exorcism, and the demon gave him the name. He happened to be friends with a linguist who was an expert in Mesopotamian or whatever ancient language. She said, "Yeah, this language has been extinct for about 3,000 years, but this was the name, and this is what it means."
Wow. But what is the significance of the name? And just before we get to that too, that's because when you hear, there's a lot of people that claim to be witches, and the demon names that you kind of you hear like Baal, you hear Moloch, at the whole Bohemian Grove thing. Do you ever encounter one of these high level demons, I guess?
Sure. Yeah, they're going to be, those are going to be your higher level ones. Those are you have different classes. When Jesus drove out Legion, Jesus says, "What is your name?" So it's the demanding of the name that gives one dominion by forcing the name to be said. When we name something, when God gave Adam, when God had Adam name creation and the creatures, that established dominion. So in that naming is in a sense dominion over. So when the priest demands the name, it's a tap out. It's a jujitsu tap out. I'm tapping out. I'm giving you my name. This is akin to the wrestling, the lucha libre, when they pull off the wrestler's mask. You're shaming him, and you're unmasking him. So that's why you always, if you wear a mask, you got to never let him take off your mask. If you're a professional wrestler. So the name indicates something of who they are. Even we know this again, going back to again, everything the demon does is a mockery of God and the church. So the different divine names of God: Dominus Deus Sabaoth, God the Lord of hosts. This is God the divine warrior. Moses exclaims after the Exodus, God is a warrior. Warrior is his name. This Dominus Deus Sabaoth, the Lord, the God of hosts. This is the God that intervenes in human history for his people against evil forces, cosmic forces, and fights for us, right? This is what that title indicates. But then you've also got a title of God that God is a lover, the beloved, and so this indicates that God, the jealous God, the lover God that betroths himself with Israel and now betroths himself with the church, with us, our soul. So these different names: Prince of Peace, Wonder Worker, God-man, Son of God, Son of Joseph, Son of Mary, Emmanuel. These different names indicate something of the reality of God. Even, your name, my name, these names have different meanings. When parents pick out names for their children, Abigail means my father's joy, and so there's something significant in the name. The demon picks up on this, and so his names these names mean different things. Baal interestingly means Lord, but the word Lord also means husband. And so in Hosea, it says, "No longer will they call me my Baal, but they will call me my husband." And if you don't know what these words mean, then you don't understand what's going on. That Israel had taken the false gods and entered into adultery. An adulteress, the language that prophets use is adultery. They entered into adultery and worshipped false gods. And so God designed the relationship with Israel, his people, and now us, because we are the new Israel, in this nuptial relationship. And so no longer will they say to this Baal, "You're my husband," but they will call me, my husband. That's the return. And so that nuptial relationship with God, this betrothal is essential. And in that name Baal. And so Baal is the demon of impurity, And so that is a very common one. Baal Zebub was the Beelzebub. Or Beelzebul, you hear that these two terms interchangeably. It's the same demon. Beelzebul means the Lord of the house, right? And so this is a mockery of what? Who is the Lord of the house? God, the
Right.
Shekinah glory that dwells in the temple, that led Israel, the pillar of light by day, light by night, the pillar of fire by night, the pillar of smoke by day. This spiritual presence of God's indwelling in the tabernacle, his presence among Israel, the Lord of the house. And that demon claims to be, it's a mockery of that image of God, a mockery really of the Holy Spirit. And so in the Old Testament Hebrew, they refused to give him that title, so they gave him instead the Lord, the Beelzebub, the Lord Baal-zebub, the Lord of the dung heap, the Lord of the flies, the Lord of death. So where the Holy Spirit brings unity, peace, virtue, goodness, you have the opposite. You have strife, you have division, you have filth, you have the dung heap, if you will. And so those names carry these cosmic meanings. Moloch, its various forms, was the god that Israel would fall into. There were three basic categories of demons. Different cultures would have different names for them, but you basically have got fertility, you've got blessings with crops, and also protection in war. And they would do various types of sacrifices to them, some more extreme than others, to invoke again the help of these deities. What we call them deities, but they're demons. In Psalm 95:5, the gods of the Gentiles are demons, and so they're making these relations, covenantal pacts with them. And so we see this is carrying into the modern age. I mean, this is what Rogan and Tucker Carlson and these others are starting to see. Something bizarre is happening, and we don't understand what it is, but it's ancient. We fight an ancient enemy, and the ancient weapons are best. We're seeing these things play out in real time.
Well, this is really this is what I really want to talk about as well. So so you're talking about ancient history, right? The Israelites succumbed to these false gods, and I think you've described it before. It was like a stain forever on the Israelites in a way. And you mentioned earlier you're in Iraq, and obviously the whole world is kind of aware that this whole lie of weapons of mass destruction, they never existed. So you were put into this war, which maybe you didn't even need to fight in the first place. And then, like you're saying, Rogan, Tucker, they're all kind of talking about this now. All eyes are on Israel. So, what do you think's going on over there?
Yeah, no, I mean, this indeed is a rabbit hole
Yeah.
that a lot of guys go down. And here's the problem with rabbit holes. I've seen guys, and I'm not gonna try to avoid the question, but sometimes you can go down some of these rabbit holes, and I've met guys and I know guys that have gone down some of these rabbit holes. And if you spend too much time in a rabbit hole, you get oxygen deprived, and so you got to be careful that you don't start forcing the Israel question into every single construct. Although I do think there's something there socio-politically, but also spiritually taking place behind the scenes. This is where, Christ was. I mean, these were God's chosen people. Now they rejected Christ, the Messiah, and so the gospel was taken to the Gentiles, you and I. Gentiles are the non-Jews. If you go to the Latin Mass, you'll see a movement. The priest prays the epistle on the right side of the altar, and then quietly and ceremoniously, he picks up the Gospels and the Bible, the New Testament. He walks it over to the left-hand side, and he places the Gospels there, and he reads the Gospel, symbolic of the movement after being rejected by his own people to the Gospel being proclaimed to the Gentiles, to the nations, which I would argue was always embedded in the Old Testament. It was always embedded into the Old Testament that God in the New Covenant would bring the nations in, which is what we Christians believe. But what's going on behind the scenes? There's a lot of theories, and there's a lot of guys have done a lot more research than I have on the topic. I think it's telling though that there's constant strife there. I think I just read today that Israel just launched more bombs, and
the ceasefire has ended.
Ceasefire already. Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. So. Yeah, I think I don't think they're as great of an ally as we tend to portray them, and so I think it's we have to be very cautious. But again, I'm not a social scientist, and this is not something that I'm. It's not my expertise, but I can tell you spiritually, there's a whole lot there going on behind the scenes, I think.
Yeah. I mean, all eyes are there, and we've never really had a war, genocide, whatever you want to call it. We've never really had one of these things filmed in 4K. So it's unavoidable, really. But you're probably aware of this too. And I've brought this up to other religious people too. And they said this is a niche group. But you're probably aware of some of the rabbis in the Talmud. There's this piece about resurrecting Christ, and he's burning in excrement for all eternity.
Yeah. No, I'm not familiar with that, to be honest with you. So I think again, it's just a rejection of Christ. He's not burning. Yeah. He's reigning in heaven. We just celebrated in the Latin Mass calendar the Feast of Christ the King, which in the new calendar will be at the end of November. Christ the King of the universe in the cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Washington D.C. There's this and inside of the dome is this huge mosaic of Christ the King, and he's just huge and yoked, and he's king not just of heaven, he's king of all the nations, he's king of all the earth as well. And so you can make those claims, but the denial of the resurrection is something, again, it's diabolic. The denial of the resurrection. I mean, it's historically verifiable. The resurrection. The eyewitnesses, the church eyewitnessed these things from the beginning, and he appeared. So you can deny these things, but the reality is, it's like we have one of our aircraft it's the AC-135. It's a C-135, and they've put all sorts of armaments. AC-130, and they put all these armaments on it. They call it Spooky and other names. And their model is, you can run, but you're only going to die tired, And so you can run from Christ, but you're only going to die tired. So you might as well face this reality that he is the King of the universe.
Yeah. Well, I have one more question for you then. And, I think one of the things which pushed people away from Christ as well was this whole Ned Flanders, Christ is a hippie, he's just, peace and loving. Would you say that's accurate? Or would you say all of that's kind of a bit of a psyop?
Yeah, that's the problem for me is Jesus. We see him, skinny jeans. He's got a tight beard, perfect hair with hair gel.
Right.
That's a false understanding. If you look at the early church, or for example, Revelation 19, Jesus is on a war horse, right? With a sword coming out of his mouth, and his leg tattooed says King of Kings and Lord of Lords, to slay the nations, to slay his enemies. Jesus himself says to Pilate, says, "Are you a king?" He says, "Of course I'm a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. If I commanded it, legions of angels would come down to defend me." And so in the early church, they picked up on this imagery of Christ the divine warrior. I mean, going back into the Ignatius of Antioch, who was a disciple of John the Apostle, he actually was martyred before John himself died. In 110 AD, Ignatius was led off to be killed in Rome and fed to the lions. And he said the cross is our vexilla. I have one hanging over here, my vexilla, my cavalry flag, the first of the seventh, the red and white stripe, 1-7. That's the battle flag, the unit flag. When I was in Iraq, I exchanged patches with some Brit soldiers. It's kind of a military thing. You pull your patch off and you exchange soldiers. Exchange patches with guys. It's a solidarity thing. That unit, right. whether it's the British SAS motto, "Who dares wins," or whether it's the first cav, first team, the Green Berets de libre oppresso, to free the oppressed. That battle flag, the symbolism. Mine was the first cavalry, the horse head, and the big patch, the kind of iconic one. That was my unit. This means something. So in 105 AD, 106, this was the battle flag, the cross was. And then within that generation, you had Tertullian, Hippolytus of Rome, talking, the flag is our tropion, the word they use, tropion, where we get the word trophy. Tropao means to turn. This is the spot on the battlefield and I saw this spot in Iraq because I fought a conventional war. Okay. And then we went into non-conventional war afterwards in the second time over, and then Afghanistan, non-conventional. But I had it where we were tanks, lines of tanks, just like ancient battle, where they would have lines of battle battle lines. The Romans would have the triplex acie, which is the 3 battle lines of units, boom, 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 and they would just rotate up like a buzzsaw. And in this type of battle, and it's force on force, whether it's tank or whether heavily armed legionaries, at some point in the battle, there's a turning. The enemy turns, and when that first guy turns, this is why the Romans, the legionaries, would stand there with a swagger stick, a vinea, it was called. It was a vine branch. It was a thick, about 1.5 inch thick vine, vineyard vine that would bend like this, but not break. And they would use that as a punishing stick, a swagger stick. And they would beat, if somebody tried to break ranks, they would beat them right across the back of the leg and say, you get your butt back in line. And so, because once that line breaks, slaughter is on. That's what the cavalry was. I was a cavalry guy. Then they would send in the cavalry on horseback, and they would start slaughtering these guys, cutting them down. Because once you turn your back on the enemy, you're in run. It's slaughter in ancient warfare and modern warfare. We slaughtered the Iraqis in the same way. And so that spot on the battlefield is sacred. I have a coin in my study here from the time of Caesar Augustus of a tropion, and what it has is you've got a T for the Greek tau, and on that you hang the enemy's helmet, their cuirass, their armor, their weapons, and it becomes English we would call a war memorial. This is the spot that marked our victory. And so the church fathers in the first 2 or 3 centuries, they likened, and Augustine, Chrysostom, Hippolytus of Rome earlier, Tertullian, the cross is the tropion. This is the war memorial. This is our victory. This is where Christ, our David, with the sword of Goliath, cut off Goliath's head, the demon Goliath. And so this is the ancient imagery of Christ, the warrior. In Catholicism, when you're confirmed, at least in the old ritual, the bishop would give you a little slap. They called it Colee, Colee. It was back to the days of chivalry. It was back to the days of knighthood. It was a reminder that you now enter the church militant. We're now serving Christ the King, and you're now a soldier. When I was in Iraq, I bore the uniform of the United States Army. And if I left, I committed desertion, and I would go to prison for that. I am committed for this battle. Civilians can come and go. They can leave when they want, but a soldier is committed to the end in battle. And that's what the symbolism, we are soldiers under Christ. This is how the early church saw Christ. St. Paul himself in Ephesians chapter 6 says, our battle is not with flesh and blood. It's with powers and principalities, the forces of this present darkness. And so this is what we're up against. And so this modern idea, Jesus a nice guy, Jesus as the social justice warrior, this is a false Christ. We need to reject this, because this is what we're saying. The only type of warrior that we can be is a social justice warrior. Anything else is toxic masculinity. And that's all a lie. Jesus Christ was the ultimate male. And he was, I just saw an image. I was at a church in Illinois at a chapel, a retreat. I was giving a retreat this weekend. And there's an image of Christ and his mother embracing, Our Lady of Sorrows embracing him as he's leaving now to go on in his ministry, to go eventually to the cross. And he's got a neck. His neck is huge. You know what I mean? Wow. He was a masculine guy. He was a carpenter. You know what I mean? He wasn't a soft kept guy. This was a tough guy. This is a guy who gave his life for us, who emptied himself of his divinity to take on our humanity, and in that human and divine offered himself back to God for us. And so he's a warrior. This is how the early church saw him. So we have to retake that. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 409, it says that all of human history is one of dour combat with the forces of evil, beginning at the beginning of time, and extends into the present day, that we are called to do combat and militate. This is Christianity, and we've allowed an effeminate Christianity take over, and we've allowed, again, modern constructs, modern academic feminist construct to enter into our understanding of Christ, church, redemption. And now in many ways, the church has become a bit of a NGO. We're just a non-government organization to distribute and do acts of charity. Yeah, we are called to do charitable acts, but in the tradition of the church, the spiritual acts of mercy always had a superiority to the corporal works of mercy. So the spiritual acts, rebuking the sinner, And the other spiritual acts, corporate acts of mercy. This is the spiritual always takes primacy, but understanding Christ as the warrior. This is what this appeals to guys like Joe Rogan, Sean Ryan, and guys like you. You realize, hey, Christianity is not for the weak. It's not for women. Christianity is something that's actually masculine. It's actually something that's not, by today's standard, is toxic masculinity, but it's masculinity. There's nothing more masculine than giving of oneself as Christ did, and we should do likewise.
This is exactly, that was the big thing which actually made me walk away from Christianity. But to hear that actually the image has been distorted and this is the truth, I think that this is a big thing which is pulling people back.
Yeah, and what's interesting is there's even studies now that young men, I just saw it, I forget where it was in, what article, where it was, at Washington Times or something, or Washington Post, but it was young men are coming back in large numbers, and they're coming into more traditional conservative forms of Christianity. And young women are dwindling. They're moving away from Christianity, but it's young men are being attracted to beauty, to the beauty of the Latin Mass, to the beauty of tradition, to the beauty of conservative, of authentic preaching, authentic Christianity. That's drawing young men of your generation are coming back for that reason, because you recognize there's evil out there, and it's only through the ancient Christianity we're going to battle this ancient enemy, and it's going to be through masculine. I agree with you. I remember after I had a conversion experience in Iraq, drifted. I mean, I never stopped going to mass, but interiorly I kind of drifted, and then had a heartfelt, God will bring us to our knees, if we won't do it voluntarily. And I remember pulling over next to this field, in a farm, and saying, okay, Lord, I'm not sure what this means, but things aren't working my way. And so everybody says I need to have you as my Lord and Savior. I don't know what that means, but I ask you to do that. I prayed from the heart, but I'm a man. I'm a guy's guy. So I prayed like a guy, and you know what I mean? And I just said, Lord, I give you this. I ask you to be my Lord, my Savior. I don't know what this means. Use me, heal me. But I only ask you, I'm asking you straight up, man to man, just don't make me a sissy. And I prayed that. I mean, I picture myself, I got to grow my hair out. I got to learn the guitar. I got to wear kind of soft clothes and maybe a Hawaiian shirt and wear skinny jeans. And that's what it means. That was what the devil really had me from fully engaging in my faith. And that was 30 years ago, and that's how, 20 years ago, that's how we kind of see, oh my gosh, it's been, 30 years ago. So, but even then, that same lie, if you become Christian, you're going to have to get neutered. And what's interesting, let me finish with this. Saint Teresa of Avila. So it's not just for men. Saint Teresa of Avila, who was a doctor of the church, the founder of the Carmelite, OCD Carmelite sisters, they're cloistered. She says that she wants her daughters to be barbata, which is what you have, bearded. I can't grow a beard. I'm too fair skinned. My beards look crappy. She said, I want you to be barbata. And she's picturing these men coming off of campaign, with beards. This is why our special forces and your special forces wear beards, because they're non-conventional, and they don't wear name patches. They don't wear shoulder unit patches. They wear cool gear, cool hats. They don't all match, because that beard symbols to the enemy. We don't play by the same rules. We're non-conventional. We're special forces. We're Green Berets. We're Navy SEALs. We play by different rules. That beard, what Teresa says, I want my daughters, talking about Carmelite sisters, to be bearded, to be barbata, and she says, in pursuit of virtue, so rugged and so manly in pursuit of virtue that you frighten men, And so being tough, being virtuous, being masculine, being manual is to reject effeminacy, which is what is many young men and older men and many women have fallen into. Effeminacy is not being feminine. A woman should be feminine, but not effeminate. And a man certainly shouldn't be effeminate. We should be masculine. We should be virtuous. That word virtus, Julius Caesar would stand up before his troops before battle and say, men, be virtus. Virtus, we hear the word vir, man, virtue. It means manly courage in battle. And this is what we're called to do. And unless we go back to our original understanding of who Jesus Christ is and his full humanity, his masculinity, we fall into the trap that Christianity's it's effeminate, it's a social justice thing, And I get it why a lot of people are rejecting it, but it's good. It's good you're seeing through it. And I encourage you to find a group of men that are like-minded and just start, pick up your gear up and get to battle. I just saw Joe Rogan. You talk about a tough guy. He's starting to embrace Christianity and been going back to reading scripture and going back to going to church in some form.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, he's like these as well, and he's still going. The guy's an animal.
Yeah, he's an animal. Yeah.
Yeah, no, dude, you're completely right, and I'm not surprised when I see men going back to church, because modern life has failed them, and we've been doing this experiment long enough now to see there's no payoff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, it's fantastic. It's a beautiful thing to see. It shows that God is still at work. God is still in charge, which is kind of be of good cheer. Like I said,
I feel too that when you have the men back in their rightful place, especially going to church, serving the community, everything else, I think naturally you will have women follow.
I think it just comes naturally.
Exactly. I think this is a huge part of femininity.
Yeah. It just comes. It comes naturally that women are drawn to that. They're drawn to
leaders.
To leadership. They're drawn to a man who's an actual man and not a mind. We have this idea that to be a man means to smoke cigars and drink bourbon, and that has nothing to do with masculinity. There's guys out there that we've reduced it to that. We've reduced masculinity, just as womanhood has been reduced to looks, physical features, and if you don't fit in that, you don't fit into the modern, same thing with men now. We're getting the same. It's all exterior things. It has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with the interior virtue, the interior virtue. And so Christianity is going to rise and fall with Catholic men and Christian men. This is going to rise and fall with that. I 100 wholeheartedly agree with you on that.
Thank you so much. And this has been mind-opening for me.
Good. If I can be of service in any way, stay in touch. You want to do a follow-up, let me know. We'll do something on masculinity. Whatever you want to do, I'm at your service, brother.
Appreciate that. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed our show. As you can see, our content can be a tad controversial at times. Because of that, the algorithm really, really doesn't like us. The good news is that's where you can. If you like us and you want to support us, the easiest ways are to like, comment, and subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to us here at BluntClarity. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Enjoy.